So we've looked at the research. So we've dealt with the top blue bit, and we're going to look at a little bit of the bottom blue bit, and then look at the taking control bit in the green. So that's what we'll do before lunch. And it's all based on this realization that we had, this is how extraordinarily complex Parkinson's is, and how it's a complete whole body thing. So the first thing that completely stunned me was that it's not just a lack of dopamine that we're working with. There was this lovely slide that Anthony Lang did of saying that the Ptolemaic view of the universe was that the Earth was at the center and all the planets and the sun went around the outside. And that really what had been happening over the last 200 years was that the medical profession had been looking at dopamine in the center of all the Parkinson's work. But in fact, it's not just dopamine. There are 4 different neurotransmitters involved. There's dopamine, noradrenaline, serotonin, and the one that I can never pronounce, acetylcholine?
Acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine, thank you. And they all affect different parts of the brain. So they deal, all of them apart from noradrenaline, deal with different parts of motor symptoms. The serotonin deals with the dyskinesia, and the acetylcholine deals with freezing when we're on. But they also deal with the non-motor symptoms, and that was something that was a complete revelation to me. So, you remember the elephant? What we discovered was that, whoops, wrong one. That there are so many different non-motor symptoms that we deal with. And if you remember the slide that David showed of the kind of long, thin triangles, what I hadn't realized was that the non-motor symptoms show up. I knew they showed up before the motor symptoms did, but I didn't realize that they showed up as long as 40 years before the motor symptoms show. And looking back on my own trajectory, I can see that some of the things that I was dealing with 10 years ago, 15, 20, even 25 years ago, were actually early signs of my Parkinson's. So what we the thing about the non-motor symptoms as well was this whole impact that it has on life. And particularly there was a new phrase that I hadn't come across, which was caregiver's burden. And one of the things that the Congress really helped me to land was that, you know, David and I are on a journey together. I mean, we'd always known that, but I hadn't really taken on board the depth and the complexity of the journey that he was going on and that my family were going on as well. So anytime you see the acronym CB, that stands for caregiver's burden, what they're carrying. So the non-motor symptoms it's been, considering that James Parkinson 200 years ago in his essay came up with almost all of the non-motor symptoms, but it's only been since 2004 that Ray Chaudhry, who was one of the Edinburgh lecturers, I think 3 years ago, started to measure them. And that's from his talk, and it's just a few of the slides. But over on the table there is the Parkinson's UK list of all the non-motor symptoms, and I find it hugely useful because I look at it before I go into a consultation, and I use it as a checklist to speak to Dr. Davenport or to one of the Parkinson's nurses about what it is that's actually bothering me. So I'm going to look at, in detail, at some of the non-motor symptoms. And this was an extraordinary guy called Ron Pfeiffer, and he decided that he would be doing a talk on fatigue, apathy, and sleepiness. And he put that slide up first to sort of soften us all up, and then he said, well, I don't think that's quite right. So he put this one up, which was a bit daunting and perhaps a little bit over the top. So having softened us up that way, first one I want to look at is sleep. Now this is, I don't know if any of you come across this, excessive EDS, excessive daytime sleepiness, and it's something that I got it and had to stop driving the car for about 6 weeks until I got my dosage of my medication put back down again, because it's it was deeply embarrassing. I mean, I was at supper with some friends and they were showing us their holiday photographs, and I was just falling asleep every 2 or 3 seconds, just dipping into sleep and then back up again for another minute or two and then dipping back into sleep again. So, but the good news is that there's plenty that can be done about it, and if you're on an agonist, particularly adjusting the dose works. The other kind of sleepiness that he was talking about was rapid eye movement sleep. And again, this is something I hadn't realized. Rapid eye movement sleep is when you start acting out your dreams. And it can be a very early sign of Parkinson's. I mean, mine only developed reasonably recently. But, I'll wake myself up shouting or laughing, or I'll wake myself up occasionally weeping my eyes out. And just once, poor old David got his shoulder bitten very hard because it was So now I don't know, and I didn't gather from anything in the Congress whether there's anything that can be done about rapid eye movement sleep, apart from sort of full body armor if it all gets too bad. So is anyone here dealing with either of those two? Yes. Yes, it seems to sort of dip in and out. The other one that he was looking at was fatigue. And he was very clear. This is one of Ron Pfeiffer's slides. It was a very entertaining talk. But he was very clear that this wasn't what we were talking about, not just ordinary sort of have a siesta kind of sleepiness. What he was talking about was a real sense of what I call, when I'm explaining it to friends, I hit a brick wall, and I call it clinical fatigue. So it hasn't got anything to do with whether I'm rested or not rested, but it's completely debilitating. I just have to go and lie down, otherwise I fall over. And I hadn't realized that there were 3 different types of fatigue. I mean, physical fatigue, yes, I knew, and cognitive, mental fatigue I'd come across regularly. But I hadn't come across fatigability, which was to do with muscles becoming fatigued simply by being used over and over again, which is slightly weird because the treatment for it is exercise, which of course was dear to Sasha's heart, and to this whole thing about walking off your Parkinson's if you can. One of the things we'll be looking at is diet, and apparently if you tend to get very fatigued in the afternoon, if you can eat more protein at lunchtime, that helps. Anybody got any good ideas that they use to deal with fatigue? Yeah?
I've had this problem, and my answer to it has been to walk and exercise in that way. Initially, there's a heaviness about the limbs, and then you can actually get beyond that stage to a comfortable walk again.
Yes.
This is how it affects me anyway. And if I push beyond that, then I probably would suffer more. But
Yeah.
anyhow, that's my experience so far.
Thank you. And Lindsay, you've got a point here as well.
Yes, no, if I'm period of inactivity, the muscles get very weak, and it's actually overcoming, just forcing yourself to overcome that and stand up and start walking. Then within about 15 minutes, you can actually start to move around.
Yes.
And I often use a cycle turbo trainer, and that really gets you going
Yes.
and puts life back into your muscles.
Thank you. So, treatments? Oh, sorry.
I would be the other way round, I'm afraid. If I'm really fatigued, I lie flat, on the bed or whatever, and 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I can feel myself becoming energetic again. So
Thank you.
it's completely different.
Oh, and Ken's got something as well.
Just to add a cautionary remark, protein at lunchtime helps. Beware proteins and medication taken together.
Yes. Thank you. So the next one, is apathy. So a lot of you were at the talk that Ratko gave at the ERIG, was it last year? On apathy. Apathy is very different from depression. And one of the things about apathy is that it's if it gets really too far gone, it can increase the caregiver's burden. And these comments from a study that was done are really, really scary. So comments about their partner who's sunk deeply into apathy, doesn't care about anything anymore. And again, this was a wake-up call to me to be really aware of the impact that what I was doing might be having on the people around me. So, and going back to that, treatments are exercise again, and there are some drugs that can help with it, and also psychotherapy, including CBT. So it's things that we can do something about. And depression, again, there was a whole talk about depression, and one of the reassuring things was that there's a huge amount that we can do about it, both ourselves and in partnership with our health professionals. And the conclusion that came from there is that this is something that we have control over ourselves. So that's just three, very briefly, of some of the symptoms. The rest are all things that in one way or another we can directly affect ourselves. And we're going to look at particularly three ways of looking at that. We're looking at exercise first, and we'll do that quite briefly because there's been a lot of work already done by the branch on exercise. And we're going to look at nutrition, and finally we're going to look at attitude. So those three things, and then the last part of the day we'll be looking at community. One of the things that came up really clearly was this whole thing about moving away from being what was called a passive recipient of, just going to the doctor and saying, what can you do for me, doctor? But moving towards being an active participant. David mentioned earlier this whole thing about partnership, and Bastian Bloom in the lecture talked about partnership. And that's, again, the basis of what we're looking at here. How do we actually make the slides straight? One of the things about exercise that I hadn't realized was just how it affects all of our body, not just the muscles, not just the, keeping our gut moving and the blood sugar levels down, but the way that it affects the way we think, that our apathy, our anxiety, our depression. Exercise, I realized, can work for virtually all the different non-motor symptoms. and of course the motor ones as well. And let's get moving. On the table over there, we've got handouts about exercise, because we had the Let's Get Moving Day in May, which we looked at all these different kinds of exercise. Oh, wrong one. The branch is amazing in supporting Tai Chi and Pilates and dance and walking and very many other kinds of exercise that we'll look at in a minute. The thing about those ones is that they're skills-based learning. And the thing that came out very clearly from the 3 particular exercise specialists that were at the Congress, there's Giselle Petzinger and Gammon Earhart and Lynn Rochester. And we were lucky enough to have Lynn Rochester at the Let's Get Moving Day. And one of the things about exercise is that it should be skills-based learning, which means that if you're walking, you need to walk on different types of ground, so that your body is, and your mind are adjusting the whole time. If you're just walking on a treadmill, that gives you good aerobic and strengthening exercise. But to really start, that's not me, is it? It's outside. Yeah. To really start getting the neurons regenerating, reconnecting, then skills-based exercise where you're having to think when you do it. So dance is particularly good because the coordination that we did with Sasha, with looking one way and putting your hand up in the other ways. The other thing that came out very clearly from Lynn Rochester was that any kind of exercise works. Gentle exercise is incredibly good as well. And it doesn't have to be exercise. It can be good, ordinary, everyday activities. So gardening, housework, shopping, preparing food. As long as we're moving and thinking at the same time. And now I'm sorry this one is so small, but the research that was done by Og and his colleagues in 2014 shows very clearly the benefits of exercise for people with PD. So higher quality of life, less degree progression over a year, and less cognitive decline over a year. So exercise really works. And that I found incredibly inspiring, because the motivations for exercise that the same study did looked at what's motivating is enjoying the exercise, having it done. Music was particularly effective in keeping motivation high, so the dance again comes in there. And knowing that it works was part of the very high motivation levels. So knowing that exercise actually makes a difference to me, to how I function on a day-to-day basis and to how I can manage my symptoms, is really very, very motivational. And they also said exercise works very well in company. So I couldn't resist a plug for the branch activities and all the different kinds of things that we do. And again, on your tables, there are bits of there are lists of all the things that the branch does. So, nutrition. Sorry, before we move on to nutrition, is there anything anyone wants to add in about or say about exercise?
Thank you very much. Can I make a plug for the exercise, etc.?
Yes.
Because we are not getting really big numbers at the moment. And we have, as I say, the swimming, as you can see, wonderful warm water. And we may lose it because we're not getting enough people coming. You know, so people have, it's the apathy bit as well, I think.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, all the classes that the branch put on are for care partners as well as for people with Parkinson's. So, yes, thank you. Helen.
there are difficulties if you have other conditions as well. I have osteoporosis, and that greatly affects what I can do. And even the straightening of spine, which is the beginning of Tai Chi and Pilates and things like that, I really can't do that because of the effects of osteoporosis.
Yes.
Which makes, the exercise fine, but the fatigue and things like that coming on top of this condition and Parkinson's makes life a wee bit hard sometimes.
So there may be something to do with some of the aquafit where you're supported by the water that might be helpful. But that's the sort of thing that I'm not an expert in, so you'd have to ask the nurse. So, thank you, Mary.
I just wanted to say that we're always, as a branch, the committee are always open to new suggestions. So if there's a form of exercise that people are interested in, they want us to look at, then let us know, because we're, we're looking at Nordic walking, which came as suggestions. So we're open to suggestions.
This is good exercise.
Thank you. The last speaker has actually taken the point that I was going to make, and that is I've recently taken up Nordic walking, which is walking with lightweight poles.
Yes.
And the Nordic Walking Association actually recommends it for Parkinson's. So it might be something that would be worth exploring.
Good. Yes, because we're getting that going quite soon, aren't we? In the new year. Bill, you're organising that, aren't you? In the spring. So it'll be advertised on the branch website. So, nutrition. Now there were two whole sections about nutrition, and one of them was actually chaired by Bastian Bloom, who was the Parkinson's lecturer in October. And the thing about nutrition is that we can use it to help manage our symptoms. And again, we can use it to help slow the progression and also counteract malnutrition, because I've certainly I'm very slowly losing weight through being unable to absorb goodness from the food that I eat. Other people get malnutrition from being unable to swallow properly. So getting proper nutrition can help to balance out some of these problems. And the medical nutrition theory, this isn't just going to a dietitian, this is medical nutrition theory. PD affects all of us, and nutrition affects all of us. I mean, basically we are what we eat, I suppose. And the speakers on this were very clear that everything is affected by it, and that we can do huge amounts ourselves on it. And the problems are that PD has an inflammation in the brain, and anything that we eat that increases that inflammation or increases the oxidative stress, and my grasp of oxidative stress is tenuous. But what happens is that it can increase or worsen our motor symptoms and our non-motor symptoms. So we'll look at what we can eat to balance that out. The Western diet of lots of dairy and fried foods and sugar doesn't help either, because when you have a blood sugar spike in your a sugar spike in your blood, or glucose spike in your blood, you also get an inflammation spike in your brain. And there's some of the high fructose things, like the fizzy drinks, are really not at all helpful. Chemicals and environmental toxins as well. There's chemicals in so much. And what I hadn't realized was that a lot of the sweeteners have neurotoxins in. Now, given that our neurological system is compromised deeply, to actually put more in is not helpful. The a lot of the solvents that we use in everyday cleaning have got toxins in that we're breathing in as well. And a lot of the pesticides that we use in the gardens, or the weed killers in the garden, also have serious levels of toxicity. So, before we decide that we're completely doomed, oh yes, so there was a study done of the contrast between the Western diet and what they called the prudent diet, which we'll come on to later. And basically, that's it. We've had it. And Heather's Vicky put up this next lovely slide, which, all right, well, we're not allowed any pizza, and we're not allowed any fizzy drinks, and we're not allowed any chips. What can we eat? So she proposed a strategy. So the strategy was to increase the anti-inflammatories and the antioxidants that we eat, to increase the brain food that we have, and also our levels of hydration, and to avoid chemicals. And she suggested, and again, this is all there's a handout of all of this as well that you can pick up later. Increasing the antioxidants and the anti-inflammatories is delicious, basically. This is one of the reasons why today we've got fruit and nuts on the tables. And the wonderful tray bakes that you've been eating, most of them are sugar-free. So the darker the berry, the greater the antioxidants. Nightshade family, this comes back to the nicotine, because tobacco is a nightshade plant. Sorry, Mary, did you want to say so? Oh. So peppers, aubergines, and tomatoes are also nightshade plants. So the more of those we can eat, the better. Spices and herbs are terrific. One of those particular ones, the curcumin, the turmeric, and the cinnamon and rosemary are particularly good. One of the caveats was buy them organic, because some of the non-organic ones are adulterated with just yellow dye. And some of the non-organic ones that come from China have actually got lead contamination in them. So buy proper, organic, more expensive spices and herbs as you can. I buy my turmeric, actually, fresh turmeric from the Whole Food shop up the road, and it's wonderful and delicious, and I chop it up with lots of ginger and lots of garlic. They also talked about supplements. Now this is something that I've never actually tried supplements properly before, but I'm putting an order in on Monday for these ones and see what happens. The second one was hydration and brain food. Water up to 8 glasses a day. Now, she wasn't specific about the size of the glass, and I do have to sort of balance that out against lots of water and running to the loo more often, because that's one of my non-motor symptoms that I find challenging. But the more hydrated I am, the better my digestion is going to function, the better my brain connections are going to be. And now the next lot come back to the slide that David showed about the caffeine and red wine. Now, caffeine, again, be sensible about it. Red wine, be sensible about it. I don't drink red wines, and I'm not allowed white anymore, which is very unfair.
Just out of interest, why not white wine?
Because there's sugar content. Sorry. Green tea is a wonderful antioxidant, and for those of you who really don't like green tea, one of the good things about this is apparently if the tea bag or the fresh leaves go in, even just for 7 or 8 seconds, that's enough to get the antioxidants into the water without making it too strong. So,
Furthermore, I know that there's ever been able to answer the question to me of what about rosé, which is halfway between what does that do? Nobody mentions rosé wine.
Sorry?
Nobody mentions rosé wine, which is between red and white. Does it have advantages or disadvantages?
I don't know, but my understanding is that rosé tends to be on the sugary side, so probably not a good one to go for. But that's just my own thing, not horse's mouth. Nuts, again, you've got them on the table. Nuts, particularly Brazil nuts and walnuts, they are very good for the brain. And yes, I mean, all of these have to be taken very carefully. If you do have choking aspects, then I would imagine, and I'm making this up as I go along, that ground almonds is probably the way forward. The cooking, olive oil and coconut oil, I've started using coconut oil the whole time for cooking, because if you use any of the other ones, they get, the other oils go into trans fats, and that causes oxidative stress, which causes inflammation, which doesn't do us any good. So fish oil, olive oil, as long as you don't heat it, cold pressed olive oil, as long as it doesn't go above 180 degrees, and coconut oil, which can go to any temperature. The last strategy is avoiding the toxins. So either buying organic or washing it. All the grapes, they weren't organic grapes, but they've all been washed this morning carefully. Limiting milk and dairy. Now this is an interesting one, because one of the papers that came up was about the impact of dairy on, particularly on middle-aged men. There was a correlation between milk and Parkinson's. Now they weren't sure whether this was to do with the pesticides that the cows had been grazing on in the grass, or whether it was to do with the whole thing about uric acid. Because the thing about dairy is that it counteracts uric acid, and uric acid is a good antioxidant. So the more dairy you eat, the more antioxidants you kill. Some fish have got mercury in them, and again, what Heather's Vicky said was, Google it. She wasn't giving us a definitive list, although she did say, be very careful of tuna. So these strategies for avoiding toxins, avoiding adding to the toxins that we already have in our bodies. The pyrethroid and insecticides, they've been around for about, I think they were actually, the PCBs were banned in the 1970s, but they've got a very long half-life. But pyrethroid insecticides are around at the moment. We can use them. You can buy them you can buy them in the shops and the garden centres. So don't. And so what came up was the prudent diet. And it also, I mean, it's extremely delicious, extremely healthy. And one of the things that she said was, just make changes slowly, one thing at a time. The major change that we've made is to move to coconut oil to cook with. We had a pretty healthy diet before, but we're, when things got hard, there were times when nothing would do except double egg and chips. And so I've stopped nipping into the chip shop next door to get the chips and bringing them in and doing the double eggs. I just do the double eggs and I fry them in coconut oil. So nutrition, I think, yes. What did that one say? Yeah. It's very clear that there's a very strong link between nutrition and feeling good. And this isn't just for people with Parkinson's, it's for all of us. Yeah.
I use ginger. It's tasty. You get it in a lot of things. And when I eat it, it just opens up all the tubes.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't... Ginger. Ah, yes, ginger's wonderful.
I eat ginger crystallised without the chocolate on, so it's just crystallised ginger. And it just opens up everything and gives me the power to get on my legs again.
Thank you. Any other nutritional hints and tips? David?
Just one thing, Alison, that you didn't mention, you probably know about, but you didn't mention rooibos or red bush tea, which contains no tannin and no caffeine rather, and little tannin.
Yes, that wasn't something that came up in the presentations that we saw, but perhaps we could have a. We're going to be asking you to, or inviting you to have a discussion at your tables afterwards. So perhaps you could dig into that more deeply then.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. Thanks.
There's 4 slides here which are about why plant chemicals actually work. And these are much on the same sort of lines as David's ones. But I thought we would put them in, and Helen very carefully helps. That's the overall thing of what Parkinson's misfunction looks like. But these are the different ways in which plant chemicals actually help to attack the different bits that we're being attacked by. Oops, wrong one. Let's go back. So that's the scientific evidence. This isn't just whole wheat sandal kind of stuff. This is deeply scientific work that's been done on why plant chemicals actually make a difference to us and to our brains. So, oops, and even, oh, this is the one. Sorry, whoops, wrong way. There. Right. Oh, and even more. And again, if any of you want copies of these slides, they'll be up on the website shortly. So, taking control of our lives. I loved this slide that Sarah Rigari had. She said that over the course of a year, she spends exactly 1 hour with her neurologist. So 2 sessions of half an hour each. And what is she going to do with the other 8,765 hours? And Giselle Petzinger is very clear that managing our symptoms is partly down to the medication, and God bless the medication. And the rest of it is down to ourselves and what we do with managing our symptoms. So that's one of the things that we'll look at now. We'll look at the way in which there's the physical and the emotional and the mental side of this, taking control of our lives. And a lot of it is to do with the choices we make. There was a whole session, a whole half-day session on taking control of our attitudes, taking control of how we approach life. And one of the things that came up very clearly was the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that we tell to other people, and the ones that they tell us as well. So Brian Grant, who is this amazing guy with PD, he was a champion basketball player, and he talked about what happened when he got diagnosed first, that grief cycle, the anger and the denial. And I kept my head in a bucket of sand for about a year and a half before I finally pulled it out and shook the sand out of my ears. And his thing was, he just woke up one morning and said, what on earth am I doing? He hadn't told anybody. He'd managed to hide it. And he called it doing the man thing. This guy was about this tall and, real big American basketball player who started up the Brian Grant Foundation. And his phrase was, well, it's a new best friend. I hate it, but I have to get on with it. And the other people were talking about the unwanted visitor, the unwanted guest that we just have to get on with. And he went from embracing it as unavoidable and hating it to embracing it as a blessing. So his whole thing was, how might I take this and shift it and shift my own attitude and actually start giving back to the community. The next slides, again, I'm going to go through them quite quickly because we've got handouts about them. And this was about taking control of our own lives. And this very much mirrors the work that that Liz and Bill are doing, running the self-management course, which is another one hopefully starting. No, that Liz, sorry? One of the things that she said that really resonated with me was, I can't change the past. All the sort of, well, if I had done this or if I hadn't done that, then maybe I wouldn't have PD now. I just put it on the raft and let it float off down the river. And we'll look at volunteering later on. The research that she was quoting is very clear that volunteers actually are healthier and happier and more engaged and enjoy life better. Bob Kuhn was another person who's had Parkinson's for many years, and he talked about embracing a positive attitude, because not only did it give strength and hope to ourselves, but it very importantly gave strength and hope to everybody around us. And he talked about how he maintained this. And his thing was the need for engagement, encouragement, and inspiration. And he said encouragement is very much the word encouragement with the word cur, heart, at its center. And inspiration, being able to breathe life into oneself and into other people. But finding a passionate purpose, choosing a challenge, going beyond what we ourselves want and need. And basically he said, well, it's the only choice that it's the only logical way to play this card. It's the only sensible choice to make is to step forward and get engaged with life, to dance with life. Because otherwise, when we slip into the apathy and the depression, but we have a choice. And I suppose that's one of the things that came out for me so much was I always have a choice. I always have a choice about what attitude I'm going. If I find myself slipping into, I can't be bothered, or feeling sorry for myself, that's a danger signal to me. It's a time I made a choice and stepped into some of this thinking instead. And I couldn't resist this. This was a card that I found in a shop in a small town called Neatarts, and I just thought it was so good. Attitude's the most important. It was a birthday card, and inside, thought it was just lovely. Feel free to choose whatever darn attitude you fancy. So one of the last things was about communication, and she started off with the story of the two wolves. It's a Navajo American Native Indian story where the grandfather is talking to his granddaughter and saying, I've got these two wolves inside my head and they're fighting like crazy, and one of the wolves is full of self-pity and aggression and anger and misery, and the other wolf is full of compassion and love and optimism and hope. And the granddaughter says, which one's going to win? And the grandfather said, the one I feed. And I thought, whoa, what are the stories I'm telling myself about which way I'm going to go forward? So the other thing she talked about were the challenges of non-verbal communication. And I know when I moved into Edinburgh with David, 3 years ago now, and got engaged in this community, I spent the first 6 months or so thinking that everybody disapproved of me and didn't like me because I hadn't really figured out about the Parkinson's mask. And she told the story of the guy in Leatherhead back in 2012 who was watching the Olympic cycle race coming through. And he was watching it with, just intent on it, and his face slipped into the Parkinson's mask. And he got jumped on by the police who thought, what's happening? Here's somebody who's not engaged, who's not having fun at this cycle race. He must be a terrorist. And he got arrested, thrown into the back of the van, taken down the police station. He kept saying, I've got Parkinson's, I got Parkinson's. That's what is all this? They didn't let him have his phone call. In the end, his wife got really panicky because he was supposed to be back at his daughter's 9-year-old daughter's birthday party. And she finally managed to track him down to the police station. But he was there for 5 hours. So this whole thing about the challenges of nonverbal communication, when people are expecting one thing and they're not getting that. I know that I have to keep my face consciously animated when I'm with people. And also the challenges of finding the right words at the right time. So, one thing she said which really landed with me, it's not the person that's the problem, it's the problem that's the problem. So, I'm still not quite sure what that means, but it's one that I'm puzzling over, and it really feels right. It's not me that's the problem, it's my condition that's the problem. So, nothing would be complete without reference to the poster that Bill and I wrote and that Lindsay designed and that we had had up in the poster hall. And the reactions to it were very positive. Everybody loved the look of it, and the people that stopped and spoke to us were all talking about the different groups that they ran as well. Nobody, however, had one that was just for PWPs only. The woman I was speaking to there was a social worker who ran a group, and she was horrified at the idea that we might actually be competent to talk to each other and get a huge benefit from it without somebody there to guide us. But as you'll see on the thing over there, the thing that we particularly value is that learning about good communication within the group normalizes our sense of who we are. And that helps to empower us and leads to better communication. So the whole thing goes round in this wonderful virtual circle. Sorry, was there a... So, I suppose the learning for me was that the unwanted visitor doesn't rule my life. I'm the one who rules my life, and I always have choices. And the importance of working with other people and of being clear about what my needs are and transparent about what my wants are and listening to what other people are saying is needing as well. And I just thought I'd put in a little plug there for the Quality of Life group and for the side-by-side course and the carers group as well. So, taking control of our treatment. One of the things that came out very clearly was that it's important to listen to the patient's and the carer's voice. Now this, one of the other things that was talked about was there is an inherent power imbalance between the medic or the health professional and the person with Parkinson's. And this is where the move from me being a passive recipient of the drugs and the benefit of the knowledge to being an active participant and pushing back, as it were. Bastian Bloom talked about the patient as teacher and the doctor as the partner. Not that the patient is the partner of the doctor, but the doctor is the partner of the patient. And Jane Bush talked about research that she had done about what we actually want from our consultants. We want them to build trust with us. We want them to listen. We want them to take time. And one of the things that I'm finding is that I can actually, by going in with my list, I can actually say, I need the time to go through this, and build active listening and shared understanding. After my very first appointment with Dr. Davenport, at the end of it, I thought, I stuck my hand out and said, thank you very much, I think we can work together. And he went, oh, I hope so. And it just shifted the balance so that we were equal. He brings his expertise, his extraordinary expertise in neurology and movement conditions, and I bring my deep and extraordinary expertise in myself. So, and that one came up in that was wonderful. The patient will never know how much will never care how much you know unless they know how much you care. So we've got about just over 10 minutes till lunch. And what I was going to suggest was that in your tables, you actually have a discussion about some of the things that we've been talking about here, about what you can do for yourselves, what you can do to help other people, how you shift attitude and how you shift your eating, your exercise regimes, what you found works. And then on each table there are bits of paper and pens and so forth. And then we'll gather all those together after lunch. So 10 minutes just to have a proper conversation, not just sit and listen to me.